All right, everyone. We are about to go live with Barrett Brown here. We have an interesting one tonight. I think you'll all be happy. Of course, prepare your questions and all the other fun stuff. He is almost situated. Staying in a old flat in England there. So give us just one more second. And we are live. All right, everybody. There we go. Barrett Brown in jolly old England. It is not so jolly tonight. So I will have a link for you guys, in a minute once we've kind of explained some things here. But let us know, Barrett. Why are you on here tonight? What's the story tonight?
So I've been in England for about 5 months now, and as always, I'm always on the lookout for stories or issues or events that, on top of being important in and of themselves, also help to highlight other key issues. And this is one of those. This is also one of those things that we expect to be able to use as a means of testing and proving out new techniques by which people can collaborate together to achieve positive ends that would not otherwise be obtainable through existing institutions. And so this is really bizarre, kind of sordid story that maybe tells us a little bit about England. And England is a country that's confused me quite a bit since I've been here. I cannot get a read on this country, and maybe this story will help us figuring out, our British comrades here. Yeah, it's interesting.
Is anyone
I'm a little
else
taken aback, as you can
reminded
tell.
of Fear and Loathing? With Hunter explaining that he cannot explain himself in this climate. Um, very much that sense of just something's wrong here. We are on Zoom across the pond, so sometimes there will be a little shakiness to the video here and there. Yeah, so Natanya Wayborn is who we're going to talk about first, right?
Yes.
All right. So, what's the situation there? As I understand it, a family is attempting to use some old world laws to steal their home, basically.
Yeah. So the deal is that Mark Keds, who was the front man for a number of very prominent punk bands here in London, uh, Senseless Things, the Dead Cuts. He was involved in several other bands as well. He wrote a couple of songs for the Libertines that I actually, turns out, I'd heard before back in the U.S. years ago. Anyway, he died in January, somewhat unexpectedly. He'd been suffering from a sort of emphysema-like disease for a number of years, and nonetheless, he did not expect to die in January. He had actually been getting a little bit better in the months beforehand. Although, having said that, he had also been somewhat incapacitated in this very bed for some period of last year before that. And his longtime partner, Natanya Wayborn, had been his caretaker as well as his partner for 7 years, and also the subject of a lot of their the art, the cover art and videos that the Dead Cuts and these other groups had been putting out over the years. And I'll post some links to some of the more interesting ones later for those who are interested in that, in the whole punk thing. So when he died in January, paramedics came and pronounced him dead at some point. And within a few days, Marx began maneuvering to take control of his assets, not just his assets, but the assets the two shared together. So that comprises this flat here in London that they've lived together and maintained for 7 years, that she's helped to pay some of the mortgages on, that she's and so forth. as well as this was announced by one of the other band members after Mark's death. There was an ongoing deal to sell a good portion of Mark's catalog and the catalog of the rest of the band for a very large amount of money to one of the firms that buys music catalogs. And so, being bereaved and being kind of busy with kind of the loose ends that come into play when your life partner dies unexpectedly, Tanya's been busy with the funeral arrangements, with a number of other things, maintaining the apartments, dealing with some of the other issues I'll mention in a bit. And meanwhile, the mother, sorry, there's a cat scratching in one of the three cats that we'll mention.
We can hear it. Is no worries.
It's quite loud. It's a dainty little cat. Anyway, so short version is that the mother has taken a position, and we got a letter from a lawyer she's retained yesterday, taking the position that Natanya should leave on June 1st and just clear out altogether, and that she should also immediately send a key to her law firm so that they can come and assess the apartment and get it ready to sell. In the UK, just like in the US, if you die without a will, and many young men do, because we're not known for our responsibility and preparation and so forth, the estate of the deceased goes into what's called intestacy, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which means that there's certain rules that then delineate who the estate goes to and how and why. In this case, because Mark and Natanya, all that estate ostensibly goes to the mother. She's the nearest living relative, or the one that's its highest in the pecking order according to the UK's intestacy laws. There are luckily provisions in the intestacy laws that would allow Natanya, just like many other people across the US and UK who come into this kind of situation, to petition a court and say, hey, perhaps some of the stuff that's partly mine I can keep, and perhaps on top of that, like some of the estate could go to me, since that's what the deceased clearly would have wanted. And so that does require, like in this case, her actually retaining a lawyer. She's already talked to one, and proceeding in a sort of court situation with this family, and proving like, yes, I've lived with them for 7 years. Yes, I've made, I've paid for this apartment. I've, took care of him during his health issues for several years, was thus unable to, be employed to the extent I would otherwise, so on and so forth. And thus, perhaps I could just keep this apartment or not have to move out in a few months. That's kind of the basics of it. It gets worse and worse as we go into the other issues here. The parts I can really talk about at this point, and obviously this is a weird situation where, I've had to kind of work out what is and is not like public consumption at this point. Mark Ked's changed his name. His real name is Mark Myers. He changed his name many years ago to Mark Hammerton, and then also went by Mark Ked's as a stage name, partly as a means of distancing himself from this same family. And we won't go into some of the family situation stuff here tonight because some of it is
sure,
but
it
unusual
sounds
and kind of sensitive.
It sounds highly probable that he wouldn't have wanted most of his belongings to end up with that family.
Not only that, there's actually documentation to that effect. It seems to me. I think that would be clear in general, just given the fact that he's been estranged from his mother and his sister for years and years, given the fact that he's lived with Natanya, given the fact that she was kind of the subject of a lot of his art and collaborated on his art for years and years. It is we can probably justifiably say that he did not want his partner to be kicked out of the house and made homeless, along with our 3 cats. You'll see them. You've already heard one of them that they raised together. That's probably fair to say, and that he would, on top of that, would not have wanted all of it to go to his mother, with whom he had a very strained relationship for reasons that become more and more understandable as one learns more about this. Anyway, and hopefully that's what a court will find, to the extent this goes to court, which it seems like it might. And so that's kind of the bareness of the issue here. And of course, as one can determine, this is not a isolated incident, nor is it just a UK issue. Women in particular over the last 30, 40 years have been particularly like prone to suffer from the way the laws are written, when wills don't exist. You can have a partner in life, and one of them, may choose to bring in the bulk of the income, or maybe more prominent than the others, and have more of a ability to operate on behalf of the household, while the other one, plays some multifaceted additional role in their life, and is anticipates, as a consequence, being cared for, being, kind of not being thrown in a situation in which they are, made homeless. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that Mark Ked's among the causes that he championed, and you can see on the Twitter account for the Dead Cuts band, I think is the exact Twitter deal. You can see some of the recent tweets from last year about Centerpoint, which is a homeless charity here in the UK. It was obviously a cause that he's familiar with, and so forth. And the fans after the funeral a few weeks ago here in March, were asked to, in lieu of flowers and so forth, to make donations to Centerpoint, this homeless advocacy group. And so it would be obviously a doubly ironic thing were were his life partner and their cats to become a client of Centerpoint, because the family kicked her out of the apartment that they've shared together. It just gets weirder and weirder, and just more ironic and more kind of on the nose the more you look at it. And like I said, this does kind of extend to a wider phenomenon that's probably happened less these days than it would 30 years ago. Obviously, partners, whether it be a civil marriage or just a more informal deal, have more rights than they used to. Women who contribute to the functioning of a household, into someone's career, have more ability to they have more expectation of being treated fairly if the person dies or whatever. But it's still a problem to an extent I was not familiar with until a few weeks ago when I was appraised of the situation here.
Okay, I mean, so the points being made here are, they're complex ones, because you touch on the idea that there are partners in relationships that are breadwinners, and there are partners in relationships sometimes that are not. They're there, they provide the support and comfort and lifestyle that the person making the bulk of the money really needs, in order to do their job. And that happens on both sides. I know many men who have female partners who are making more money than them and are happy to play the role. At our house, I do all the dishes, I do all the kitchen work, I do all the things that in that situation the other partner might do, irrespective of gender or sexual identity. There's a lot of things that people do in relationships that aren't just making the money that's super important. And those people shouldn't just be thrown out on their asses when the partner whose name happens to be on documents dies, when those documents don't include a will. So are you working to focus on this one as an introduction to working on this topic? Are you going to go farther than just this one? Like, what's the story with the organizing around this?
Right. So first of all, there are several larger issues we're trying to sort of to make of this, to bring attention to via these events. But I should also note beforehand that although
And
as I mentioned earlier, it is unfair and a common thing. She also, brought an income. She's a dressmaker. One of her dresses, for instance, was featured on America's Next Top Model a while back. She is in her own right an artisan, in addition to her work with the bands and being involved in some of the music projects that Mark Heads did. And so we go into another issue where someone can contribute to a household's maintenance, income wise. It could help to pay maintenance on a house or a flat, here's they call them here, and so forth, and still also be in a position of having to prove that they own their own property within the flat, like as in just mere possessions, which is what's happening now. and I'll get into not a related issue in a bit in terms of what the legal team's trying to do on behalf of the family here. So that's important. Anyway, so, but yes, this, what we're trying to do here is several fold. In terms of this issue, in terms of these actual events and the situation in which, someone who's very well respected, well beloved by a lot of fans, Mark Heads, in order to achieve, to fulfill what his wishes clearly are, we are going to be raising money for her to work with this lawyer that she's spoken to here in London, who believes, without going into the details, there is a very strong case here for her to keep the flat or something, and that's all well and good. On top of that, we think this is a great opportunity to bring attention to a few kind of, some subsidiary issues like Intestacy, the rights of partners and all that, as well as some of the larger, and this is the kind of thing that really interests me, some of the larger cultural and political deficits that occur in the US and the UK that have become more apparent in the US and UK in recent years, and which, in the main, are also very much part of what has caused much more widespread, much more deleterious problems in those countries. What I'm saying is that there's a Dickensian streak here in the UK that one comes across to the extent one looks at the current governments, the current Tory government, and some of the ways in which it's chosen to operate in response to different things. There's a streak of civilized cruelty, like a sort of a thin veneer of pseudo politeness covering up, what used to be a international empire trading drugs and arms and so forth, and which has since dwindled into more of a more compact money laundering operation vis-a-vis London and the government. And something like this, like an incident like this, I think gives us the opportunity to look into the individual, the smaller issues that kind of flow in and out of the larger issues, as well as to remind people like, hey, there are some serious moral, ethical, and political deficits at the center of what supposedly remains of Western democratic civilization. And to the extent that we can find incidents by which to highlight that, and perhaps practice in addressing these things, and practice in getting people to helping people to get involved in very visceral ways with these issues, that's a great opportunity for us. So this is obviously, if this were a novel, like if I were writing a novel and I wanted to illustrate the theme of the novel was, yes, society is corrupt, or this society is corrupt, or like, or whatever, this would be a great narrative with which to put that forward. Vice versa, this being an actual narrative that's occurred, it is thus a great opportunity to make that larger theme apparent, and as well, to engage in the business of fixing these things, and of teaching others how to fix these things, and of developing ideas with which to fix other things in the future.
So will this end up being a project under the banner of the various operations and projects that are being built up, like the new Project PM, the new Schwartz Hastings, all the other projects that are going on?
So this should be thought of more as an operation than a project, and it's one that I don't think will take a great deal of time and energy relative to other things. I think this is something that can be easily dealt with and relatively quickly, given the facts at hand. And
I mean, this is the personal one that we're talking about. The personal one with Natanya is
oh,
not.
yeah.
But the greater
Sure.
issue at large here, which is some systemic change.
Oh, sure. So
that
so there's
sounds like a
overlap.
project.
Yeah. So this is something that it's solved and addressed and assessed the same way in principle that the other larger projects, Project PM and Schwartz, all the things involving media reform and investigating, spy cops and law enforcement. There's a lot of similarities, and some of the same people who are involved in these projects are also helping out thus far. And we've only just really begun this in earnest the last few days. I've been looking into this for a couple of weeks now, but so it is an opportunity for a lot of people who are looking for, for chances to practice, to develop ideas, develop procedures, to do so, in a sort of testing ground sense, whereby, so in this case, the villains here, and there's a couple of them, are so readily villainous that it's almost like a training exercise, like pointing to, stood properly. It's a lot easier to deal with, like, say, a horribly just out of control villainous Dickensian, figure involved in some dispute, than it is to deal with like a more nefarious, capable, intelligence agency, adversary, or palantir of some sort. So I'm not sure if I understood your original question. Maybe I didn't, but this is something that is, part and parcel of our other projects. It is a, you know, um, and it is something we're looking at. This is another thing I should go into today. We're looking at ways to gamify, to use a term that we're throwing around a lot lately, to gamify the very business of, say, fundraising, or of allowing well-wishers to contribute to a positive and to a charitable cause, in ways that are, different, novel, and perhaps more efficient.
I love it. Gamification works. We all know about the Skinner box and all the other wonderful metrics of microtransactions and giving awards. The human brain works that way, and a lot of people have gotten rich off of it at this point with all the mobile games and everything else. So it's not a bad idea to attempt to apply that logic to good. I'm there for it. For anyone earlier who heard him mention the various like England selling drugs, if you ever want to read an interesting tale and you haven't studied up on it, the Opium Wars, there is a lot to be read there, and it is a very interesting storyline that ends badly for pretty much everyone. But America to the rescue again in a war. It's a miracle. And by rescue I mean leaving a place in utter tatters and angry at us. But yeah, if you ever want to read about England's international drug dealing, you should start with the Opium Wars. Dinner. That's a good idea.
The thing about history in the Opium Wars, when England started making pizza now, so events like the Opium Wars, where we have a particularly blatant episode in fairly recent modern history, whereby an empire forces open the ports of another country in order to force the government to allow them to sell opium. The thing about that is one can learn about it, and one can, intellectually kind of get a sense of these things happened. It's easy to forget that we're still the same human beings on the whole that did this 100 years ago. That we, that there's nothing fundamentally different in how our impulses work, and how we're able to justify things, how we're able to paper over things or present things in a different light than they are. And so it's even someone who knows, like, yes, 3,000 years ago, a bunch of Egyptian rulers convinced their people they were gods and enslaved them, to the end of building giant monuments to them. It's easy to forget that that happened long ago, but still, it was the same race, the same sentient species, that did this, that is now in operation today. And so people can know those kind of things, or they can know about the Opium Wars, they can know about, stuff the CIA has now admitted to doing, and so on and so forth, and still be reluctant to accept that maybe these same very dark tendencies, and these same kind of historical currents whereby these things are allowed to happen even in an otherwise just society, or even, facilitated by people who are otherwise moral. It's very difficult to make them understand that very much the same kind of things can happen, just under different guises, generally with different rhetoric around it, different effects. Obviously, once Hitler has arisen in Germany, Nazi Germany in the 30s, it's going to be hard for another Hitler with that name to arise in the same country under the same, with the same party platform. But it will be fairly easy still for others to do fundamentally the same thing, just without calling themselves Nazis. And so, what I'm saying is that when you see a system that allows for what everyone would recognize as a justice, and what no one would defend, where they come down to it, and you see individuals involved perpetrating that injustice, and you see unfold, you're better able to get the sense. Here's the kind of civilization and the point in history that we're still working within. And so it makes it easier if you can show someone like, hey, this horrible person will do this, do this terrible mundane thing. It's thus easier to also convey that maybe there are other issues occurring, assassinations, propaganda, election theft, and so forth, that impossible in a society in which the veneers, in which the rhetoric, and in which the trappings of things are so well developed so as to hide the nature of those things, to hide the fact that those things are happening. Someone who sees injustice on a small scale, and that oftentimes a large scale injustice is perpetrated by people with more capable institutions with more resources. So that's kind of why an issue that might otherwise seem like kind of a one-off thing appeals to me, because ultimately that's kind of what our understanding is made up of our awareness of the average thing that can happen on a daily basis in a society, and thus the recognition that society might be vastly corrupt at its core.
I mean, might be is leaving it lightly. Is corrupt at its core. I believe is the truth of it here. Yes, Mackie, the bot is wonderful to me. It does all my work of begging for me. It's great. Love you. Yeah, so the first thing up is going to be a legal fund for legal aid towards, saving this one situation, in the hopes that a better understanding will come from winning this one that can be used to then change the rules for everyone else, or at least start a bigger fight for changing those rules for everybody else. Am I reading this right?
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, whenever you can find a great example, one that's particularly egregious, and one in which the lines are very clearly drawn, and can point to those things and say, see, even in this case, the institutions are still broken, then it's much easier to convey how big of a problem it is, how widespread it potentially is, and so forth. So obviously, an egregious case like this is a great one if our goal is to solve larger problems, along with this one as well. So that being the case, you're always looking. It's one thing to have a great hero. It's one thing to have like a likable hero or a just hero. It's another thing to have like a particularly despicable villain. And we've got a couple here. And as such, I do think this is something where not just the Intestacy issues, not just issues involving inheritance rights and estates and so forth, but other issues that I can't really get into quite yet, that kind of coincidentally lead off of this, can also be addressed and pursued and brought attention to. And of course, you have to be aware of a problem in order to solve it. And this is a great one by which to make people aware.
So I have pasted a link into chat there for everyone. That'll also be on the YouTube upload tomorrow night. That is a link to a Facebook group about this specific work. There'll be a legal aid page up, which will be linked to there, and all that other fun stuff tomorrow. It'll all be tweeted out as well if people don't want to go on Facebook. By all means, totally understood. Yeah, this will start moving in that direction. But I also think this is interesting because I think this is also in some ways class-based, in that most of the poor people I know don't have wills, and most of the super rich people I know do. In that, when you have like a family legal counsel on retainer, they're probably making sure everything's settled. And when you either fall out with your rich family or you are just poor like the rest of us, you don't end up with that kind of coverage. Everyone can take the time to do it, but with, how to put this, the expense of being poor being both money and time, wills become a second thought as you fight for food, as you fight for shelter, as you fight for all the other things necessary to remain alive. That I'll do my will next week becomes the 5 years down the line, but you've died and now your family's dealing with it. Whereas the rich people just have that done for them almost with the legal coverage of the family. A lot of times the family of rich people will even enforce it on the children because they know how much generational wealth is moving through the family. And they want to ensure, its stability through time. And I get that. I'm not complaining that rich people get wills. I'll complain about rich people existing at certain levels, but not just the fact that they get wills. That's a different fight to be had. There are bigger reasons why they can go fuck off. But it's just, it feels classist to me as well, these laws, these rules that allow for, you not having a will, basically meaning you lose all of your stuff. Because for all we know, and I won't get into details or ask for numbers, but for all we know, maybe he was paying most of the mortgage, but what about the upkeep bills, the maintenance bills, the electric bills, the heating bills, you name it, the things that maintain the location so it doesn't fall apart? What if she was paying all of those? It's probably pretty close to the same amount of money every month, and that's a very valuable location. If anyone doesn't know, foreigners buy flats and houses and mansions in London just to hold on to because the property value's skyrocketing for it's been 40 years of just straight skyrocketing property values there. They're just investment pieces. So no matter the size or location of this flat, that family is trying to grab this because it is a London flat, which means it's automatically very valuable. I don't know. It feels classist to me. It feels like that's another piece of this puzzle.
I hadn't thought about it in those terms, although I should have, because I have been here 5 months and I have gotten a sense that is not necessarily available to you and me, and maybe you more than me in the U.S., given that we have a more ambiguous class system there, and never we're not always quite sure what class we are at a given time. If you have
I know where I am.
Right.
I have slept. I'm gonna say this, and don't hate me for it, but I have slept in your mother's guest room, which is as big as my apartment almost. So,
because my mother she married well again, and so what is her class? Is she the the geisha kind of thing? Kind of, yeah, in Texas sense. That's what I mean.
She did the marry an oil man thing, which is typical Dallas from the 70s.
Exactly. And so where does that leave me is the question. And, the answer is who knows. But no, absolutely. It is a class thing here. Everything apparently is. And this is, again, that's one of the things, lessons I've learned that I was kind of not prepared for. Beyond that, the issue here of what if one runs afoul of, the wealthy family of a significant other. There's a larger issue is what happens when one runs afoul of any more powerful or wealthy institution, and when one does so in a vastly imperfect, not very well maintained civilizational structure. And the answer is, well, here's an example of one of those things that can happen. So those watching this who may I don't want people to see this as a limited issue of this phenomenon whereby a significant other is screwed over by the other family or whatever. The larger issue here is what happens when for some reason some powerful and corrupt entity, whether it be a family, a government, a corporation, these things running in tandem, decide that they want something from you. To what extent can you be confident in the institutions around you or in the culture around you to protect your rights and those of others? And the answer, as it often turns out, is you ought not be confident at all. So that's another reason why this kind of resonates, is because you and I, in particular, and a lot of people we've worked with, have seen a lot. I mean, in terms of like unexpected, kind of hard to anticipate behaviors by a certain kind of person who doesn't have a conscience, apparently, or is not as bothered by their conscience as others might be, and who, for some reason or another, have the ability to carry out their will pretty much, without need for restraint. And we've seen the results that can have, not just in an individual's life, not just collectively across the space of all individuals, but in the context of governance, politics, social mores, political mores, what is not deemed what is deemed acceptable, what is deemed normal. We've seen the Trump family, for instance. They were not the first terrible administration to run the U.S. They won't be the last, but they did, in many ways, push the envelope, uh, uh, pushed some of the superficial and non-superficial restraints we had on power. Uh, and when that happens, it becomes normalized. It means that next time, we have a kleptocracy family, in power, when the children are found to be doing deals, with the family name, like all the things that the Trump people did. I can't even. There's too many names, so I'm not going to try to think of a good example here. It means it's less shocking, and thus less easy to bring to attention, less easy to generate outrage over, and less easy to correct. It's a vicious cycle.
The bar
And it
only gets
applies to
lower.
every element of life. It applies on the micro scale, like here. It applies on the macro scale. The things we've seen in the last 5 years, last 10 years, last 20 years, in the U.S. and UK. And the results, I think that the silver lining here is that we've gotten to a point in the UK as well as the U.S., where the average observant, feeling, decent person knows something is terribly wrong, has seen it up close for once, if they haven't already, and is now, I guess, more receptive potentially to solutions, to radical solutions to these problems. It's no longer a matter of maybe several million Arabs going to die as a result of the U.S. embargo in Iraq and adventures that we kind of forget about over there. The violence is more evenly distributed. It's harder to just read a Time magazine article and like, oh, that's terrible, and put it away. The violence is there, your doorstep. With COVID, with the economic, just the never-ending economic collapse that's hit the middle class and everyone else in the Western world, and that's an opportunity. As with any crisis, it's an opportunity to say, hey, things are bad. Things have been bad for a while. Now you see how bad they are. They're going to get worse. If you can point to any institution or leader or so forth that you think could palpably reverse this, great. God bless. If you can't, listen to what we have to say. Look at what we've tried to do in the past. Look at what's been accomplished by others, and let's try something new. And so that's why issues like this are very important.
100% agreed. You brought up COVID, of course. I'd love to hear your opinion. Is this ever going to end now that the British variant is shutting down Europe again, and Fauci says that more than 30% of our new infections are this British variant, and our old immunities to the old one from last year don't count towards this one? And Miami has decided that they have to put a curfew in to stop spring breakers from gathering on the beach. Are we too stupid as a species to actually get past this?
Yeah, sort of. I guess I'll put it this way. I'm going to do something that should have been done regularly by people in our field, in the media field and the expertise field and so forth for the last 20 years. I'm going to defer to others who are better positioned to answer the question. Thomas Friedman, people like that, the New York Times, or the average talking head on CNN and so forth, they will answer any question just with a guess, whatever. Yeah. They don't have to be right because no one's really checking. And as such, the nation and its institutions and its lawmakers, its policymakers, and so forth, its citizens get a great, huge morass of very mediocre advice, sometimes deleterious advice, and are then in the position of trying to determine who should I have been listening to the whole time? Where's the credibility? And so I'm going to say I have no fucking idea to what extent these variants are going to shut down Europe or so forth. I have no idea what's going on. What I do know is that there are procedures whereby we can look at people's guesses over time and say this person has been generally right, this person is generally wrong. Let's listen to the ones who've been right about this particular issue. It's a very simple thing when you state it outright. It's a very obvious thing when you state it outright.
We have
it's
experts
a very
like Fauci.
obviously moral thing. Yeah. It's the same thing with Thomas Friedman, the people who were predicting, who were telling us, worry about this, but don't worry about this.
Yeah.
Putin will be a great boon for democracy, as Thomas Friedman was saying 20 years ago in the New York Times. And then it says 7 years later, oh, Putin, they should have gone for Putin. Like, it's just, that's really the key to all this, is that it's one of the keys to all of this, is that expertise, credibility, these have been kind of disregarded. And we've forgotten the basic protocols by which we can determine whether or not someone is more likely to be right than others. And we're not applying that lesson, that very basic principle, to severe life and death issues, pandemics, and so on. And this is the natural result of that. The natural result of a world in which hucksters are just as able or better able to make their way in the world as those who perhaps have the information or care a bit more about the answer. And again, it's all quite obvious when you look at it. It's obvious what's happened in the main. It's obvious why it's going to keep happening under the same fundamental procedures. And that being the case, our best opportunity is to build sort of shadow protocols, separate protocols, scaffolding protocols, whereby we can start building institutions that people can look at and say, okay, that actually works. That's based on very clear, obvious, basic principles of how we determine things and what we do about those things.
So I've heard some interesting rumors about all kinds of fun adventures you might go on around the globe, all related to whether you're staying in England or not. Is that a subject you're willing to talk about? Like what's going on with your residency there? Are you gonna get thrown out of the country, or where are you gonna end up?
Well, so the short answer is I don't know. And I don't think anyone knows, because regardless of what particular laws are in place or what procedures are, this country, even more than the US, and probably more than a lot of countries in the West, is not extraordinarily great at doing things. I don't want to say that the British, I don't want to say that, there is a class in Britain, there's a couple of classes that have traditionally run elements of the government and so forth. And I've learned more about these people in the last few months, watching them give press conferences on COVID and watching them deal with what's going on in Bristol right now with the anti-police riots and the asylum issue and so forth. And I've seen them explain themselves. I've seen them try to justify things. I've seen them make excuses. And I've noticed that they are not as good as we are at lying and being deceptive. Like US politicians or US criminals, they don't have to be. There's a class of governance here in the UK whereby you're kind of born into it, and you don't have to get good at like excusing yourself or justifying yourself. And I've seen some extraordinarily terrible apologies, terrible excuses, terrible explanations that sometimes don't even seem like they're meant to make sense.
Like they don't have a PR person writing it for them.
If there's a PR person writing these things for them,
they should be fired.
Tell you, then at the very least. So I guess what I'm saying is that, so I don't know. I don't know my status or anyone else's status here. And my inclination is not to stay here terribly long. There are other places I can see myself being a little bit more at ease. Having said that, this is very much a power vacuum, very much a leadership vacuum, to an extent even beyond the US in many ways. That's the striking thing about this place. That's the most striking thing, is that there's a palpable sense of hopelessness, among what you might call the victim class, the class that's being victimized most, and just a lack of killer instinct, a lack of cunning on the part of the oppressor class here. And again, I'm from Dallas. You're from the Dallas area too, and your father and my father were both, dynamic individuals.
They both had their fun in different ways.
Yeah, so well, I guess what I'm saying is that it's just so much wrongdoing occurs here with so little effort and so little need to like hone those skills. And so that's good from the standpoint of a reformer. It means that there's not much, they don't have immunity. They don't have, it's like someone who hasn't touched germs before and then gets sick. It would not be hard to make the ruling class here very sick very quickly, because they have no immunity. They haven't had to. And that could get us into other issues involving the left here and how it's operated and what it's been doing that might have been kind of, not that useful over the years and so forth. But that's another larger issue for another day.
So I might another organizational topic. Okay, so you might be convinced to stay and fuck some shit up, but you also might go on other adventures, and you don't know yet.
Well, 6 months ago I thought I was moving to Antigua, so I mean I never know what's going on. So.
Right. Well, the rumor I heard, which I think would be kind of funny, is that you might go live for a while in Tunisia,
So
and
so
that sounded
I
fun.
can talk about that. That's something that, of course, the U.S. government was aware that that was one of the plans 10 years ago, um, back when we were shopping around for places we might go to escape the U.S. government before the hammer came down. Um, and Tunisia is certainly a country where you and I and others have
We still
some
have
history.
friends in government.
Exactly. And so it's also a country, it's a young democracy. It is a country that, relative to much else around, one could perhaps even feel proud uh, to live in, and to pay taxes in, and to assist. Like, imagine going to a country and like being contacted by a government ministry and being asked like, hey, can you help us like identify threats to democracy? Because we as a country were suppressed by a dictatorship that was being assisted by companies in France and Britain and the US and Israel. And we are sensitive to these things. And so rather than, coming down on, rather than arresting people and framing them because they were exposing threats to democracy posed by intelligence contractors and so forth, we'd be more inclined to like actually cooperate with people who have been right about this for 10 years. Imagine that. Imagine how different experience that would be to, say, the U.S.
It'd be amazing.
So
I mean,
that's really, it's an attractive
yeah.
concept. So
When I heard it first, I definitely thought that was an interesting idea. I thought there are lots of good poems and books written by authors such as yourself in places like that.
well, I mean, if Tunisia is a more exotic version of prison. I mean, it all works. All you need is a little bit of I would be comfortable about not being oppressed. I feel like that might, you know I feel
It'd
like
be a weird feeling.
we do our work better when we are under some oppression, because we can write about that. Imagine having to go somewhere like not being able to easily find like incidents of corruption and wrongdoing to write about.
I know,
Kind
right?
of scary.
Just viewers out there. Imagine Barrett Brown happy, like
Yep, it's nightmarish.
it's absolutely
Nightmarish
nightmare.
concept.
I mean, I love you, Barrett, but you do actually do your best work under those kind of pressures. You aren't wrong.
And
Yeah.
so this is live, and of course, by the time this YouTube version goes up, the fundraiser for Natanya and the legal counsel for this, that will be presumably live on the crowdfunding site. So there'll be a link, presumably, when those of you who are watching this taped version, and I'm assuming we will have that posted in some textual thing under the video.
Yeah, it'll be in the descriptions. It'll be in the tweet that goes out. All the fun stuff.
In the meantime, we do have this Facebook group that they've created. There's a couple of groups. One's private, one's public. The link to the public one is there for those who wants to learn more about this, get updates, and of course on the Project PM Twitter, PROJPM, I'll be posting all of the relevant updates and links as well. So anyone who's really interested in this issue, who perhaps knows someone who might be inclined to donate to a potentially precedent setting and definitely issue, solidifying story, should do so. This thing will be staying with for a little while until we achieve what needs to be achieved. So I would encourage those who, even if you can't donate yourself, which is sure many of your listeners, if you know somebody who this resonates with for some reason, a single mom, whatever, please make this available to them. And there will be some less rambling, more concise written versions of all this on the crowdfunding site that they can pass around too. So they don't have to listen to me for an hour talk about why this relates to the fall of the British Empire and so forth.
I think it's been interesting. I think the audience has liked this one. Yeah. So of course, chat. I have to do the thing. Like and subscribe and follow and all the fun stuff to the channel. And we'll make sure to share all the other links out there for everything. And I'm asking, chat, do you got any questions for him? Anything that you want to know that we haven't said yet? I would talk about the Boulder event today, but we don't have enough information to really form strong opinions other than the obvious one that, again, an active white shooter gets taken in handcuffs, seemingly nicely walked to the cop car, and it's another one of those I doubt would have happened for any other race.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we've seen enough of we've seen the discrepancy between the Black Lives Matter protests in the U.S. and elsewhere last year, and how that was dealt with, and the January 6th riots, in which we watched Lester Holst of NBC like repeatedly say, "Oh, it looks like a peaceful protest. It looks like they're just peacefully protesting, and meanwhile there's cops being bludgeoned to death, and so forth." We know it's one of those things where like this would be more worthwhile from an educational standpoint if it hadn't happened so many times. But I mean, if anybody is still not aware that
on that
white
point,
active that yeah,
I want to show something. I'm gonna pop up an image here that really hits that point home like really strongly. This image is just one of those moments where you sit back and you have to, if you see this image and don't think what the fuck, then you've got other problems. Because this is the tweet of the day related to this for me. This is from Mike Flick, a guy out in Boulder, and look at that list of events just within 20 miles of him. Just within 20 miles of Mike: Columbine, Deer Creek Middle School, the Aurora Theater, the Arapahoe High School, Thornton Walmart, the STEM School, and now the Boulder King Supers. That is just 120-mile radius. That many huge, public, big, active shooting situations have happened. Every one of those, a white domestic terrorist. Yeah, that tweet right there really hit me today as I watched. Yes, Splendid, they did get him. They just walked him right to the cop car, seemingly kindly. Which you just don't get in any other situation. Yeah. So here we are. That's just one little 20-mile radius that many things have happened in. It's what is going on there and there, like, alone. Yes, it's happening all over the country, but that little area is a massive concentration of this stuff, and it's crazy.
It is the natural result of a number of things that have been done and that we have failed to do.
I mean, obviously, proper gun laws, proper regulation of the industry. Like many others here, and this might be the Texas in me, I am not for just, fighting off guns from everyone or taking everyone's guns, but I am for sane gun restrictions, proper background checks, and, multi-day waiting periods, and all the other things, shutting down, the gun show loopholes, and just, there's 100 ways we can make things saner, and the only reason we haven't is because Colt and Remington and a few others spend a hell of a lot of money lobbying against any real gun law changes.
Well, I would not. Well, anyway, I'm gonna avoid remarking on that because it's an issue close to my heart.
It is. I have seen pictures of you as a kid.
So,
out on safari. But we're from Texas. I mean, this was stuff we grew up with. This was all around us. This was, it was part of life. And maybe it's like that in Colorado. I just don't know. But, yeah.
It is to some extent. I mean, and that's probably one of the factors at play here with the Colorado element. There is also a huge presence in Colorado of, just like with Texas and a few other states, of a certain overlapping series of sort of political personas, whereby one would expect these kinds of things to happen more often. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is a Colorado issue on top of everything else.
We don't have motive or victims or any of that type of stuff yet, so I don't want to go into any real detail there because we just don't have anything but speculation. But yeah, I thought that tweet of just that 20-mile radius. You've probably seen the signal group, and we do have a little bit of information that a couple of people collected.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as you said, we don't have many solids. We do have some leads so far. People are kind of compiling. Some people we work with. and I haven't had a chance to look closely at them. But
And unlike Reddit, they haven't just
it
been
does kind of
posted
look like
publicly.
sort of thing it usually turns out to be. So
Yeah. So the one thing I have tweeted out about this is that I am, of course, waiting for the public apology from the police saying he was just having a bad day since he's white. Which is, what I expect out of cops at
Right.
this point. Yeah.
Would it
Wow.
make you feel any better if they retroactively use that terminology to describe the guy who was arrested for shooting Martin Luther King? They said he was just having a bad day.
I mean, it'd make me happier if they admitted that, that was an op and that they publicly came out with the paperwork.
Right. I know, but
I mean,
the best is the enemy of the good.
Yeah, steps, right? Steps. Yeah. So, what does chat have? Chat is asking you to shoe on head, of course. As they do every time I have a guest at this point.
Never got around to doing that, actually.
Yeah, I don't think you've done that one.
Adrian Chen really set the bar high for all of us by just doing it immediately. The moment he was offered stolen documents.
Yeah.
Shoe on his head as fast as he could.
I mean, I have that one literally queued up. I mean, there you go. I mean, that one's just ready to go on a moment's notice. Good old horrible bastard Adrian Chen. Anyways, yeah. Yeah, so Berdam mentioned that they saw Kurt Tanner in the episode of the new HBO documentary, Q Into the Storm. Which, Kurt didn't know if he was going to appear in it or not. We'll talk a little about it on Friday, but he interviewed back in September for hours and had no clue if it was going to be kept or not. Wasn't told that it was in the final cut. But it was interesting in the documentary because they draw the straight line from early Anonymous and Chan culture to Gamergate to Q. They draw that straight line and they do that with cuts.
I saw a reference to this.
Yeah, they do that with cuts of Kurt Tanner talking. I've only seen a couple short bits of it. I haven't watched the whole thing, so I'm going to go back and watch it before I talk too much on that. But Gamergate and things like that is definitely one of Kurt's big regrets in life. We've talked about that on the show a few times, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little on Friday. But I don't think you're not going to be in that documentary. And I talked to the director.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of it. Yeah. But
it's a like docuseries, so there's like multiple episodes. I think it's like 6 or 8 or something. I did talk to the director as they were doing it, but we never actually did video, so I don't think anything I did is going to appear in that one. We'll see. I mean, Kurt also didn't think he was going to appear in it, so who knows? What else? Let's see. I asked.
On a related note, there is a documentary I flew to LA to shoot for last year, made by Gary Lang, who's a great, actually fantastic documentary filmmaker and journalist. The one that's ostensibly about Commander X, called The Face of Anonymous, is premiering. I just got an email from the publicist a few minutes ago, premiering at the Hot Docs Canadian International Documentary Festival, so forth. And I believe you're in that one.
I am in that one.
As am I. Yeah. We're both in the preview. Remember that came out a few months ago?
Yeah, that preview
that's coming out now, apparently.
That preview was funny.
It was a really well done preview, and really captured the essence of knowing Commander X and having to do things with him around.
I haven't heard from him since that preview came out with what I said in it. So yeah,
it's worth it. Worth it just on those grounds, though. So that'll be an interesting documentary. I think I've seen. I did see a preview version of it a few months ago.
As did I.
I just skimmed looking for the parts of me in it as usual, just to see how handsome I look.
Of course. You in that blazer.
You did an unusually fantastic job of expressing scorn just in the preview alone. You really, of course.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting subject with someone like Commander X, because the documentary was originally going to be just, here is this guy, and he's done these things, and he's big, and he's part of and it does what a lot of documentaries do for documentarians. it becomes something else as they start filming. And by the end of the documentary, it is
Catching the
not
Freedmans is a great example of that.
it is not what he thought it was going to be. It was originally a very pro
Right.
talking about this man. He's on the run from the government, and turns out not so much. But you have to watch the documentary to get it. I'm not going to give it up. I love the documentary. I like this documentarian, and I think everyone should watch it. The preview came out. It's just a little short, a trailer like preview. You can find it. I think I'll probably find it. I'll share it on the Discord. And when the documentary comes out, you'll want to see it. We're all in it, all talking about what really happened and all that fun stuff. So I'm sure by the end of the documentary actually being available on the internet, I will never hear from that person again.
Again, a plus. That's a big plus. And I can't remember if this made it in there, but one of the issues that's kind of relevant to all these other things that I did talk about, I think is referenced, is it's also very relevant to the Operation Project Hastings thing we have, the press reform deal. The New Yorker, when I was still in prison back in 2014, did an article on Commander X and so forth, claiming that Commander X and I had planned the Tunisian Revolution. Before January 2011, as in we had sat there saying, what's next? Let's do Tunisia, which is not how it happened.
No, not at all.
And it's an account they provided. Again, the account that New Yorker provided. The New Yorker prides itself on its fact checking. I know that because
their fact checking was literally just his version of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was not presented as like, oh, this vagrant weirdo told us this. It was these are the facts of this very public revolution, this very consequential revolution that kicked off the Arab Spring. Yeah, it was started by Commander X and Barrett Brown. Obviously not how it happened. So it's very rare that I have to go to a magazine and say, hey, I'm not actually the amazing fucking wonderkind you portrayed me as. Please correct that. But I did it because in this case, I wanted to prove a point to them about there are other writers there who they had said, we don't need to review the work of these writers because our fact checkers are so great that there's no possibility that we could have allowed in any errors. And so the first article I find on me says I planned the Arab Spring. So that's a great example of how deep the rot goes in the press as well. And in that case, of course, there was no intentionality there, no abundant intentionality, as Meadow Soprano's boyfriend says in one of the Sopranos episodes. There was no intent to portray me as the mastermind architect of the Arab Spring. Rather, it was easier to do that, to make the subject, Commander X, more subject worthy. And correcting something is an admission of failure.
Which they won't do. They're a New Yorker. They don't fail.
Well, they did actually make a correction to some extent, but not a complete one. They did change it a bit to make it less I guess to remedy their explicit position that I had caused the Arab Spring. They did correct some wording there, but they did not go far enough and say, like, also this guy, Commander X, that we use as a source on this, claims to have been in a time machine. It's like was sending out emails selling his time machine a few years ago, and maybe we shouldn't have listened to him about these other issues.
I think it's
in the documentary. It's just a great example of just how easy it is for things for mundane accidents to occur that just change the public awareness of major issues in profound ways. And with that in mind, one can then sort of guesstimate how easy it would be for certain state actors and non-state actors to also engage in disinformation and propaganda, given that this happens even when no one's trying to do it. And that's a big theme, that we're doing in general.
And
it's very much the real story along with QAnon of the last 5-6 years and of how things have gotten this, because it's so easy for the wrong story to get out and so hard to correct it, and so few parties are professionally and personally interested in doing their due diligence, especially when a mistake has been made and turned out to be a big mistake, and careers on the line. And that does speak to the larger issue here of the rot that's been allowed. It's kind of been allowed to exist as just a baseline. Anyway, so that's one of my pet
And
issues.
I would like to throw out there,
And
just
Frank
in response to Splendid Spoon in the chat there, it absolutely is. It's almost like colonial, and it's a American exceptionalism that two Americans must have planned the Tunisian Revolution, right? It is. There's absolutely racist undertones to that entire way of thinking. And yes, Tunisians planned it. I mean, there was planning going on for months before anything happened on the ground. And yes, there was an event. You know, sadly, someone committed suicide by fire in the middle of a street that really kicked it off the next day. And yes, we were in a chat channel with people, but the thing that I like to remind everyone of is we were all just on IRC in random places doing things when a group of Tunisians came to us and said planning was already going on, and here's what we've got, and we need your help. It was us being brought into an existing structure full of people, resources. I mean, in the end, it was like 5 of them really focused with us, but they were the conduit to all the people on the ground and all the organizing local that was already happening. And so to say that, like, you know, people like Barrett or Commander X or anyone else really planned it is just, it's wrong. Because I remember bringing you into the Op Tunisia channel, you know, and as we were sitting there, and the one thing that Commander X ever,
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the other that.
Yeah, like I brought you in.
the facts are pretty clear that I was brought in after it already started, obviously. So that's one point that would be made, and the other point is that Commander X was not involved at all. And the other thing, in defense of the New Yorker, like, you know, it's potentially a racist premise, but it's also just as potentially a mundane, haphazard premise, in so much as that same writer, same editors, had they had as a source that they had access to somebody who was actually involved in the planning of it, or an Arab who wasn't, who was just a
it's
huckster
not like the
X,
rest of us
they would have run with that. It just
unapproachable.
The bias for a careerist press media professional is to make the story as convenient for the writer as possible. And so if the subject, if you have a particular subject, you want to make that subject the story. You want to make him the most important character because he's your subject.
Yeah.
And so it could be racism, it could be Orientalism, it could be something else, but most likely, in my experience, these things tend to be convenience, just mundane, everyday careerist convenience at the expense of the rest of the world, to the benefit of a few people living in New York and Massachusetts and so forth.
And you are 100% right, Canadian Glenn. Without telecomics, none of that happens. We owe a lot to their involvement in all of the Arab Spring. It was an interesting time period as we figured out how to work in those contexts. I will say the sad thing is we were used to people on the ground that we were organizing with dying and not showing up on IRC again, literally because they had, you know, been shot in the street already from our work on the Iranian Green Wave. So that part was hard to deal with, but we were at least used to that part. When it came to the infrastructure level tech being built out, a lot of us weren't good at building out stuff. We were pretty good at tearing stuff down, but those are two very different skill sets. And when the telecomics kids showed up, they had the skill set to build and make things, whereas our side of the fight really had the skill set to take things down and stop stuff from working. And so, joined together, it really worked out to be a great thing. You know, the telecomics people were just amazing. I think a lot of the media coverage of that does fail is because there were very few of us that were involved with that level of it that also are willing to talk to the media. Like, there are very few telecomics people who even want it known that they were ever in telecomics. Like, they just, you know, they're very professional in nature. A lot of them have pretty interesting jobs, and so they just don't want it to be known, right? So, so I think that has hurt the ability for some reporters to tell a story, but there are people out there like me who are more than happy to tell that story if any reporter actually wants to do it. And I had already done it a few times, so they could have reached out. I mean, there were 4 or 5 of us they could have talked to.
Almost more to the point, a lot of that story is documented without anybody having to tell it, because a lot of it occurred in communications that were captured either, you know, one way or another, but also by all the, you know, various governments, including the U.S. and Aaron Barr and so forth, who were monitoring us at the time. So those are so the sequence of events is very clearly delineated.
Yep.
It's in my criminal discovery at a forensics lab in Dallas, and particularly in Jeremy Hammond's discovery and whatever files they have on you and all these others. So the records are there. So I mean, but again, that's kind of putting the horse before the cart. The kind of reporters we're talking about are not the sort who are going to go back and read through thousands of pages of IRC transcripts to make sure that they are presenting the correct story. That is a art that has been lost to the ages in the last few generations among the media. So, more to the point.
I will say this: the whole of society has lost attention span. It has shrunk, not just with people like me whose attention span is now shorter than a tweet. The media has also, it's just made up, like you said earlier, of the same humans who are having the same issues. And so I will say that has led to a lot of lazy reporting, as it's worded in the chat there. But that's why you have multiple people working stories. That's why you have editors asking questions. That's why you go back and forth. That's why you have fact checkers. Because by the end, you all together should have been able to get through this, no matter what.
But they very rarely do, and that's why crowdsourced research of the sort, that has been ongoing for 10 years. That's why that has generally proven to be more efficient than a careerist, editor, writer, fact checker, consortium kind of setup where they all become kind of complicit in whatever errors get passed along, and also become easily susceptible to intelligence infiltration or sweetheart deals with the companies that they're reporting on and so forth. And we have plenty of examples of that, obviously.
And as it reconsolidates back together under smaller and smaller lists of owners who, like the Sinclair Group or anyone else who control hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of media outlets, you just end up with, the narrative being all that matters, the one that they want to push.
I guess the best short encapsulated way to explain this problem is to point out that 10 years ago Adrienne Chen was writing articles about that poor girl who was being harassed by her fans on YouTube, and her father came on and did this I called the cyber police and I backtraced it, blah blah. We're writing articles on this bullshit, and then a few years later he's writing about Cambridge Analytica as an expert, and between those two points was also actively ignoring and indeed dismissing reporting by others on Cambridge Analytica, firms related to Cambridge Analytica, and so forth. So the hands of our democracy in the digital age are in the hands of people who came up by writing about memes, not creating them, not doing insightful commentary on them, not researching them, really thinking about them, but writing fluff shit for Gawker in exchange for page views. And then the process is such that someone like that can become a supposed expert on the very firms that most threaten informed consent and the basic pillars of democratic governance. So if anyone's wondering why things have gone south, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, pretty much just blame Adrienne Chen for everything. I'm there with you on that one. Like, if we could just hoist him up by his own petard, I would be happy. But yes, the idea is there, though. The media really does look for volume at this point, and they're finding it harder and harder to find authors who can put out 1,000-word, supposedly expert pieces. I've dealt with a bunch of these editors in my various, times doing interviews, and the reporters I've dealt with, and they say they get, handed 200-word pieces, and then they ask, where's the other 700 words? And the writer looks at them funny. Like, what do you mean? So I think people like Adrienne Chen are almost, grabbed up not even for, any kind of actual knowledge, but the simple fact that they're happy to turn in 1,000-word editable documents daily, and they seem to be able to output volume. It's not quality. And that's a problematic place to be in.
Not for them. They're pioneers,
Oh, obviously.
Visionary. I mean, he really had that shit wrapped up early on, didn't he?
He did.
Of course, Gawker and other properties, they all deserve credit for helping to create that situation in which nothing can really be conveyed properly, and there's no reason to convey anything properly, and there's 1,000 reasons to make it cute, succinct, funny, related to some pop culture issue, so on and so forth. And either journalism matters or it doesn't. And I would love to sort of pinhole one of these people at some point and ask, does it matter that these things were incorrect? And if not, why not? Why does it not matter? And if that doesn't matter, then
what's it all for at this point? In the end, it's just over.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, let's not let it get to that point. Let's instead work hard on some projects that hope to at least push these issues in the right directions, if not solve them. I think with Op Hastings, one of the goals is definitely finding ways to hold editors accountable for what the fuck they've done to journalism on the whole, and I can't wait to see that thing moving at a faster pace, which is coming up pretty soon. One of the things, I'd like to go out on this because one thing I should remind Chad of is Barrett is in England, and it's 1:30 in the morning or something there. I don't know. It's somewhere around there. But so we won't be going much longer. But I want to mention that one of the reasons Barrett's on tonight is in chat and in the weekly meetings for these various operations as they get built out and organized. It was brought up that maybe we should introduce some of the other people organizing these things to all of you and to the world, and so we're going to start bringing on some of the other people involved with Project PM, with Schwartz, with Operation Hastings, Project Hastings, with all of these, and getting to talk to them about their motivations, about what they hope to accomplish, what asks they might have for the audience and for the public at large. So
Kent Dahlgren will make a fantastic interview.
Yeah, he is an interesting one. I mean, we've got a guy.
There's a couple of others who are trying to keep low profile, but we have more than a few. We could lend you that I'm sure will be. They'll have a different spiel than I will, so it'll be more interesting. Everybody knows what I have to think about this stuff. But Ken Dahlgren has some remarkably bizarre, yet nonetheless very cogent opinions about a surprising array of things.
And he's loud, so the audience. I'm sure
he's ex-Air Force intelligence. Like all the best.
Yeah, again, we have some weird people around this stuff, but he's ex-Air Force intelligence for a reason, because fuck them. So anyways, chat, before I let Barrett go for the night and get some sleep here, do you have anything that you want to know that we didn't talk about yet?
And while you're waiting to reply there, I should note that the Proj PM Twitter account, as we've kind of spoken about a bit in the past few weeks, we do have an IRC server that's been up. It runs a Tor node. It is sometimes hard to access, even by technical people. For that reason and others, we're also setting up satellite channels for this Murat umbrella of projects at AnonOps and Freenode. So for those who don't remember, AnonOps IRC still exists. I was surprised to find this out a few weeks ago myself. We'll have a channel there. People can join that. You can look up AnonOps IRC and you'll find a guide to getting on there. Freenode, fairly straightforward IRC server.
Freenode's always
we'll have channels there for all that. So those who are having trouble with Tor nodes and so forth, or can't use it or whatever, they can get involved and contribute on an active basis there. And again, information on that as it comes will be on the Proj PM Twitter account, the last Twitter account remaining to me after the great Barrett Brown Twitter purge of the last 3 years. Indeed. I still hold the record for Twitter bans. So,
indeed.
Long may I reign.
Indeed, right? Yes. So, well, that's that, guys. We're gonna have this posted up on YouTube with some more links. The legal aid stuff will start up tomorrow for Natanya's fight to actually keep all of her belongings. Honestly, I mean, this is wrong. And we go out today, as I always love to, reminding everyone that today is International Punch-a-Nazi Day, as every day is International Punch-a-Nazi Day. So next Nazi you see, make sure to put him on his ass. Yes, good times. Anything you want to say before we go, Barrett?
My grandfather was my age. You were allowed to drop bombs on Nazis, and they gave you medals for it. So
I'm just saying,
dwindled down to punching them, but because they can get away with that case. But that's it's a good start. So just if you're watching this the non-live version on YouTube, which is 24 hours after the live version, then that means the fundraising thing for Natanya has already begun, and so there'll be a link here to the fundraiser deal. In the meantime, whether it's live or the recorded version, there's a link there to the Facebook group for this. We'll have updates and so forth. Like I said, the Proj PM Twitter as well will have these updates. But if you can, or if you know someone who can, or potentially can, or might be able to convince to do so, please try to help us raise at least £1,000 the next few days so that she can get this lawyer engaged in making sure that her her partner's wishes. Mark Head, the lead singer for a number of these punk bands in London, make sure that his wishes were fulfilled, and that she and her 3 cats that they had together are not further subjected to having to face the prospect of homelessness a few weeks after the funeral. So please do think carefully about who you might know that might be willing to give $20, $30 for this cause, because it's not just about this wonderful, worthwhile cause. There are larger issues at play here, and we always love opportunity to practice our skills at countering wickedness and wrongdoing and malfeasance, and doing so in a fun way where everybody gets to enjoy themselves and learn a little bit. So
there we go, everyone. As Splendid Spoon says, housing is a human right. We will fight for this. We'll have all that information out to everyone tomorrow. And good night, everyone.